Hello, ladies and gents. Welcome to CGX, and this is why the US Navy rushed CVN-73 to Middle East. Oh, George Washington. All right. So this is one of the carriers that is around there. We heard about this getting closer to Middle East, I guess 5-6 months ago, but it was never really assigned to Middle East, right? So now I'm guessing they're bringing back Lincoln because it's been there a while, and putting George Washington. Then I don't know. No, wait a minute. That's George Bush. I'm confusing. This is George Washington. This is a different carrier. Oh, wait a minute. This is a different carrier. I got confused there. So they're adding another carrier here, and I'm guessing bringing Lincoln back. So they are bringing Lincoln back and putting Washington in. All right. Let's go this one.
America has 11 aircraft carriers. Ask the simplest question there is about them. Where does each one call home? 10 answer with an American port. Norfolk, San Diego, Bremerton, Newport News. Home ported in the States, whether they are tied to their own pier tonight or out on deployment. One does not. One has its home port on the far side of the Pacific, on the soil of another country, and has for years. In early August, that one got underway off Da Nang, crossed the South China Sea, and turned west through the Strait of Malacca, bow pointed at the Arabian Sea. The USS George Washington. A carrier changing theaters is routine. A carrier that sails not from an American port, but from the place it is permanently stationed, is not. And the property that lets it reach the Arabian Sea faster than any hull in the fleet is the same property that makes moving it cost more than one ship. Because sliding west does not just add a flight deck to one ocean, it empties the only ocean that was always assigned one. For the first time in years, no deck of its own. That hole is not simple subtraction. No order says where it is headed. But to see what it carries away and what it leaves behind, you have to understand one word the headlines drop as if it were obvious. Forward. Navy Decoded takes that word apart because forward is not an address. It is a quantity, one with a price, a unit, and a property nothing else on a warship carries. Stay to the end and you will walk away with a gauge for every carrier move the fleet makes, including the next one, when the question of 3 flight decks in one sea could find its way back to the board. Start with why a relief was needed at all. A nuclear carrier does not run out of fuel and does not run out of food. What runs down is everything that cannot be passed across a supply line. Flight hours climbing toward inspections, maintenance stacked in blocks that need a pier and shore power, and people whose numbers do not grow when the work does. The USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN-72, had held that water since winter, more than 250 days, better than 200 of them without setting foot on solid ground. Its deployment extended not once, but twice. Relief was never a reward for a tired crew. It is the one mechanism that stops that clock. The work in that theater has a shape. The campaign that opened at the end of February, the one the Navy called Epic Fury, had by late summer settled into a blockade. Pressure on Iran's ports, and a running fight to keep the Strait of Hormuz open to the shipping bottled up behind it. That is the job the Relief is sailing into. A blockade is not held by firepower. It is held by staying. Now, what matters about the George Washington is not who the ship is. That part is settled. It is the state it was in when the order came. It did not leave a home port to get underway. It was already at sea, in the middle of an Indo-Pacific patrol, doing the ordinary work of the one carrier the Navy keeps permanently stationed overseas. And the Navy said as much in plain words. It called the George Washington the only carrier that could redirect to the region. Not the most capable in the inventory, the only one that could actually get there. From where it was patrolling, the Arabian Sea lay
But then again, this is like saying, oh, we have like 10 assault rifle, all with the similar chambers in it. This is the only one I can give you. Yeah, but it's kind of the same. All of them are better, right? That's not how super carriers work. They're all stronger. Like, yes, some of them could be stronger than the other one, but by few margins. Like if something is 98%, other is 100, something is 99. No aircraft carrier is going to be like 80% of the other. Right? So they're all strong. It doesn't matter. It makes sense because, Lincoln, people say, oh, Lincoln has certain issues, and it probably does because that's how it works. Basically, humans are on board, and people are not thinking about is destroyers and other ships as well. There are people there as well. They are living there, right? The system's working there as well. So there could be problems amongst that group. You can't just shift destroyers like that. So when problem rises in your destroyers, human problems basically in carrier, it's best to just shift it.
About a week off, where a hull leaving an American coast would need close to a month to reach the same water. That whole sentence folds into a single word, forward. But before we take that word apart, look at what is actually on the way to the Arabian Sea, because that is the easiest part of this ship to see and the easiest part to sell wrong. In 2017, the George Washington, CVN-73, entered the yard at Newport News for a refueling and complex overhaul. The midlife event every Nimitz-class hull gets exactly once across 50 years of service. It sat in that yard for nearly 6 years, better than 2,100 days without touching the sea, and came out in the spring of 2023 with its reactors refueled for the entire rest of the ship's life.
Changed radars, fitted with F-35s. Did that happen, just like Lincoln?
That overhaul left a few things worth naming, and they line up with the mission the ship is sailing into. Its close-in self-defense was rebuilt around 2 rolling airframe missile launchers, backed by phalanx and a Mark 38 autocannon, a fit tilted hard toward the real threat in narrow water, which is the slow drone and the fast boat, not the bomber. A new mast, a new data network, and the piece that matters most for this theater: jet blast deflectors and launch and recovery gear reinforced to run the F-35C from day one. The airwing, Carrier Airwing 5, is built around that fighter. 2 squadrons of single-seat Super Hornets, the Royal Maces and the Dam Busters. A squadron of 2-seat Super Hornets, the Diamondbacks. The Argonauts flying the F-35C, a squadron that joined the wing in the summer of 2024, taking the slot the Eagles Super Hornets used to hold. The Shadowhawks in the Growler for electronic attack, the Tiger Tails in the E-2D early warning aircraft, 2 helicopter squadrons, and a detachment of tilt rotors. The real value here is easy to miss. That staying has a product of its own: time on station. A blockade is won by holding one continuous picture over a strait, day after day, so that nothing slips through in the moment the watch lapses. And 2 machines in this air wing exist to manufacture exactly that.
F-35 is a superpower, man. I was thinking like, okay, if you're going to replace the Lincoln, is the next carrier going to be fitted with F-35? Yeah, it is. Because people are like, oh, it's just, no, it's not just a jet. You need to think about it. When certain scenarios, when you launch F-35, it is the only thing in the sky that is nearly invisible and can take passive data without like, like triggering anything else. You need that. This is like a scout. This basically gives a carrier superpower at certain level in certain conditions.
The first is the E-2D and its refueling probe. The aircraft that builds the strike group's picture is the radar plane. Without it, the formation sees no farther than its own horizon. A standard Hawkeye sortie runs about 4 hours, but only about 2.5 of those are actually spent on station. The rest is flying out and flying back. Fit an aerial refueling probe, and one sortie stretches to 7 hours or more, with roughly 5 of them on station. Double the window the picture can be held. That means fewer gaps in the track, fewer handoffs to keep the same patch of sky under watch. A blockade made more seamless by a single change in how the airplane takes fuel.
Yeah.
The second is the CMV-22B and the F-135 power module. A stealth air wing can only fight far from shore as long as its logistics line keeps running. The F-135 is the engine that makes an F-35C fly, and when one of those power modules has to be swapped at sea, exactly one aircraft can haul the whole thing out to the deck. The CMV-22B tilt rotor, the machine that replaced the old C-2A. Without it, a 5th-generation fighter that loses an engine is a stranded fighter. It is not a supporting cargo plane. It is the umbilical that keeps the entire stealth squadron in the fight at the longest ranges. Read those 2 together, and you can see what the George Washington is actually bringing. Not a new kind of weapon. The machinery that keeps the same fistful of weapons on the line longer. The picture held twice as long, and the line that feeds the fighters never.
So Lincoln didn't have that rotary plane to support F-35? Because Lincoln had F-35 as well. So basically this gives you enough loitering time, which is important. You're doing a blockade here. You need to stay there. It's not a basic like do and come back type of operation. No, you're staying there.
Cut. On a theater measured in continuous presence, that is the coin that spends. That is the ship, and that is its air wing. But read the list back, and not one item on it is what made the Navy call this the only carrier that could come. Another flight deck has F-35Cs, Growlers, Ospreys too. It too can keep a Hawkeye on station longer. What sets this ship apart is not on its deck. It is where the ship is based. A home port does for an entire theater what the refueling probe does for a single sortie. It stretches the time a deck can hold its station. Only here, the station is the ocean itself. Time to read that word. Forward. So put a value on forward. Start with how a carrier generates presence in the first place, because it can be done two ways and they cost very differently. Almost every carrier does it the same way. Based in a home port in the United States, it becomes present somewhere only after the fleet pays a transit tax. Weeks of steaming just to cross the ocean and arrive. And across that whole passage, the ship deters no one and is present nowhere, while its deployment clock runs the entire time. Then it stays a season. Then it pays that tax again to come home and disappears into the better part of a year of maintenance. The presence it generates is a slice, wedged between two ocean crossings. One carrier does it differently. Its home port sits inside the theater, so it pays no transit tax. It is already inside the radius. And most of its maintenance happens right there too because of what has been built around the place it stands. Yokosuka has an on-site ship repair facility that keeps more than 20 of the 7 Fleet's forward ships running. Because a carrier is nuclear, back in 2006, a dedicated detachment of the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard was stood up right there in Yokosuka, built for exactly the work a reactor at sea demands. The airwing is based at fields on Japanese soil, so this hull holds its engineering readiness without ever running back across the eastern Pacific to find a yard. And that pre-positioning buys the one thing a crisis actually spends: time. When something breaks, presence is measured in how many days away the nearest deck is. For 10 of these 11 carriers, that answer starts at weeks of open ocean. For the one that is forward, in the waters it is stationed to hold, the answer is already 0. Not on the way, but there. Put those together: no transit tax, maintenance in theater, response time already spent, and the public estimate from fleet analysts is stark. It would take 3 to 5 times as many rotational hulls from the mainland United States to reproduce the presence and crisis response the 7 Fleet's forward force delivers. Put it plainly, to buy back what this one carrier gives, the fleet would have to build and crew several more supercarriers, a decade of construction and thousands of sailors apiece, an invoice no Navy pays twice. So it keeps exactly one. That is why there has only ever been one. So call the carrier that just got redirected by its right name. It is not a carrier in the Pacific. It is the one machine in the fleet that generates presence without spending a rotation to do it. Sitting at Yokosuka, it is still deterring, because being already inside the radius is deterrence. Every other carrier, back in a home port in the States, counts as not present. But a standing state has one strange property, and the entire move turns on it. You cannot warehouse it, and you cannot surge it. The only way to spend it is to leave the place you are standing. The moment this ship runs west to be present in the Arabian Sea, it stops being present in the one place that made it the only one to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, the whole reason for it to exist like that is because of, like, I'm guessing it started with North Korea and Russia, but now it's because of China. There's a reason why it's in Japan, right? But right now, in this given moment, USA can just judge it like, yeah, we don't need to worry about that right now. Let's shift it to Middle East. Which is, I don't know, man. What if China suddenly decide, oh, Taiwan, it's now? Wouldn't this carrier being there would have been instrumental? I don't know. Can you, like, bring it back if that happens? Like, isn't that a problem? If China just engages, can you really bring back a carrier? Can you do it like that? I don't know. With Iran, it makes sense, but China's much more powerful.
That is where the real cost of this move surfaces. Not in the ocean it is sailing toward, but in the one it just left behind. The 7th Fleet, the largest forward deployed fleet the Navy has, now has no carrier at all. Not one fewer. Its only permanent flight deck is gone, and no date has been set for its return. The obvious patch is to surge a hull from the west coast into that water. It does not close the gap, it only prices it. Run that ship through the geometry already on the table. It pays the transit tax to arrive, holds for a few months, pays it again to come home, then disappears into the better part of a year of maintenance.
But that is logistics, man. In a perfect world, we don't need to worry about this, but there is never a perfect world, right? Yeah, you've shifted Washington towards Middle East, but you're probably going to shift another carrier there with all the issues. We're still going to bring the carrier in Japan. You're not going to keep the, like what is it called? Indo-Pacific Com or something. You're not going to keep that empty, are you?
One entire deployment spent to deliver a temporary slice of what the forward carrier held as a standing state. The whole is not -1. Measured by the ratio already established, what left that ocean is worth 3 to 5 hulls of presence, carried off by a single ship. Rebuilding it runs slower still. The fleet cannot simply name another carrier forward and stand it up in a season. Forward basing is not a line in a deployment order. It is infrastructure. Pier capacity and on-site nuclear repair, a spare parts pipeline, an airwing bedded down at fields on Japanese soil. And beneath all of it, thousands of families with housing, schools, and years-long stationing records, held in place by a standing agreement with a sovereign nation. A hull moves in weeks. That structure took decades to stand up, and it does not move at all. Analysts keep coming back to the same point. The real asset was never the ship. It is the platform built around the place the ship stands. And that platform is still in Japan, complete and funded and staffed. Only the carrier it was built to serve no longer has a return date. It has been claimed by another theater, with no deadline to come home. A carrier's position parts company with every other line on its readiness sheet. A magazine runs dry, and one shipment refills it. An airframe runs out of life, and one replacement restores it. Position has no such move. There is no reserve of it to draw down, no version where one hull holds 2 oceans at once. The very property that made this carrier the answer for the Arabian Sea, it was already within reach, is the property consumed the moment it is spent anywhere else. Give the Western Pacific its due. That water is not undefended. An amphibious group is based in Japan with a Marine Expeditionary Unit aboard, land-based air power stands ready in Japan and on Guam, and the Allies there field real navies of their own. A carrier is not the only thing that puts aircraft over the water. What it alone does is carry its own runway and move it some 700 nautical miles a day, answerable to no one's borders. A sovereign airfield underway. That is the capability that just left the ocean, and no fixed base on the map replaces it.
I don't know, man. This to me feels like a bit amplifying issue than it is. Maybe the news of Lincoln having issues is maybe it's real. Maybe it's really strong, and they have to bring back Lincoln. So like, what are they going to do? Of course, let's shift Washington there, and they'll probably put another carrier there eventually and bring Washington back, right? This might be transition thing. Right? It's basically logistics in the end of the day. Maybe it's not, something like that. Nothing to panic about.
An empty stretch of water in the west asks its own question. A forward deck was just pulled to concentrate force in the Arabian Sea. So what does that concentration actually amount to? And could it build back to 3 flight decks in one sea all over again? After the relief, the Arabian Sea holds 2 flight decks. If a third arrives, it will almost certainly come from the West Coast, and the readiest West Coast hull right now is the USS Theodore Roosevelt, CVN-71, fresh off leading the largest naval exercise in the world and back in San Diego, expected to sail for a full deployment in September, destination unannounced. We have run that constraint logic before, and it pointed at that very hull as the natural relief for the Lincoln. It is still exactly where it was, still ready. The question, will 3 carriers happen again, sounds like a question about numbers. It is not. This past April, CENTCOM confirmed 3 American carriers operating in the Middle East at once: the Abraham Lincoln, the George H.W. Bush, CVN-77, and the Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, for the first time in 23 years. Look closely at how that scene was built, and it was not a level being held, it was an overlap. The Ford had been at sea more than 300 days and was already on its way home. It finished at 326 days, the longest an American carrier has deployed since Vietnam. The Bush had just arrived. The Lincoln had been standing there all along. 3 flight decks is not something the fleet holds. It is something that appears in a window of a few weeks, between one hull that is not left yet and one that has just made it in. And every peak like that is paid for by extending the deployment of the crew that was about to come home. Play it forward. Of the 2 decks now,
Yeah, I mean, you don't need 3 carriers. There was transition period, obviously. Like I said, this was going to happen. CVN-71 is going to come from Pacific, relieve, like Washington, so Washington can go back to Japan, and then CVN-71 will be in Middle East in September or October if it stretches out, right? Lincoln will go back, do its thing, like rest and all that. Ford is already. This is why you have 11 carriers in the first place. I don't see panic scenario here. It's just working.
now in the Arabian Sea, one is the Bush, out since the start of April, its deployment nearly spent. It will turn for home. A third carrier appears only if the Roosevelt arrives before the Bush leaves, the same narrow overlap that built April, weeks long, not a level anyone holds. So yes, 3 carriers in the Middle East can happen again, and the schedule already allows it, no dramatic decision required. But it would cost more than April did. Back then, the 3 decks came out of the deployable fleet while the forward carrier still covered the Pacific. That forward carrier is now one of the 2 in the Arabian Sea, so a third deck no longer leaves the Western Pacific covered.
Yeah, you don't need 3 carriers anyway. The only analogy I can give you is like if you're working in a, let's just say, in a bathroom, let's just say you're building a bathroom, right? You're fitting tiles, you're fitting all the sanitary ware, all the things, and bathroom is small enough. You're not gonna shove 3-4 plumbers in it because there's not enough space for it. And even if you somehow smooth them in, they won't be able to do their work because people will be in the way. So you don't need carriers like that, right? If you put 3 carriers doing one job, they'll basically overlap each other and cause issues. One carrier in one region is what it's for. There are air forces there are bases that air forces control. If you need higher firepower with bombers and B-1s and things like that, you don't need carrier for it. So 1 carrier per area, that is the whole point. This is why you can use 3 carrier at once. If one is in Atlantic, one is in Middle East, one is in Pacific, right? That's how 3 works, right? You don't need more than that.
It deepens the exact gap we just traced. The concentration can still be built. The difference is that this time it empties an ocean to do it, the one cost April never had to pay. Because the fleet was never limited by how many hulls it owns, it is limited by how many carrier days it can deliver where they are actually needed, and that number falls with every nautical mile between the home port and the crisis. 10 aircraft carriers call an American port home. 1 does not. Its home is on the far side of the Pacific. And tonight, for the first time in years, the water it belongs to has no flight deck assigned to it. The thing that made the whole value of that ship, it always belonged exactly where it was needed, is the same thing it just spent to be somewhere else. Because presence is not a power quantity, it is a position quantity. A stronger ship can still be in the wrong place. A ship in the right place is deterring even at the pier. And of everything that makes a warship strong, position is the one thing that cannot be resupplied overnight or surged on command.
I mean, yeah, that's the whole point. It was in Japan, so there's a reason why North Korea doesn't go completely insane and attack South Korea, Japan, and anything, because there's a massive carrier there with hundreds of planes. Knowing that it's going to be Iran 2.0, bombs will drop anytime if you do that. They can probably launch ballistic missiles on the bases there and try to suppress them. You can't suppress a Nimitz-class carrier. This is how US projects power. It's a carrier. But yeah, I mean, it just makes sense in the end. This is how it's supposed to work, right? There's going to be niggles in the between. Obviously, nothing works perfect. But yeah, America knows logistics, so yeah. You know what? America needs to really, US Navy really needs to think about systems, not build more ships and more carriers from here, but to find middle grounds there. Maybe figure out a way so you can cycle, humans basically. So that there are people, if they're deployed longer, there are, alternative group that knows how to run the ships and it can just replace the people and cycle the people. So you can extend it, right? Get the better plumbing there, better, like plumbing issue and things like that is usually what causes the issue. Make that better, right? Increase the, like capacity and all that. You can just extend the life of carriers from there, because the mechanical carrier itself, that can last much longer. It's the like things in between that is the issue. So you can create systems like that. Well, there you go. If you like my Rickson, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.